I came home early and overheard my husband and his mother cruelly humiliating my elderly mom in the house she bought for us. Just let that useless old woman rot in a nursing home. Keeping her here only pollutes the air in our house. Instead of confronting them, I quietly recorded everything and caught a financial code that exposed their secret money laundering scheme. Welcome to Stories of Auntie Maya. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Drop a comment down below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single comment, and it helps me to know I'm not alone in this. My name is Anya Chen. I'm 38, a senior financial analyst in Seattle, the kind of person who spends her days spotting hidden patterns in money trails and irregularities that others miss. I'm calm, strategic, and I don't let emotions get in the way when things go wrong. 8 years ago, I married Grant, a charming 42-year-old business consultant. We live in a beautiful lakeside home in one of Seattle's wealthiest neighborhoods, a 4-bedroom house with sweeping views of the water. My mother, Vivian, bought it for us with every penny she saved over decades of hard work. She moved in with us, along with Grant's mother, Eleanor, after his father died. On the outside, we looked like the perfect family, successful. Careers, big house, everyone under one roof. But in reality, Grant and Eleanor were secretly stealing from my mom and treating her cruelly behind my back. That Tuesday, I came home early from work. The house looked peaceful, sunlight shining on the lake. I walked up the path, key ready, but stopped when I heard voices inside. Grant said coldly, "That miserable old hag is nothing but a dam's burden, Mom. Vivian has been squeezed dry to the last drop." Eleanor sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "Just let that useless old woman rot in a nursing home. Keeping her here only pollutes the air in our house." Grant added in a contemptuous tone, "This is our house now. She paid for it a lifetime ago. Her time is up. We've been more than merciful just letting her stay this long." They were humiliating my mother in the very home she had bought and paid for. I stayed outside the door. I took out my phone and started recording every word. While they spoke, Grant lowered his voice and read out a count, numbers and a code, something about an offshore transfer and using HOA money to cover it. My phone screen flashed as it saved the file. I took a breath, opened the door, and walked in like nothing was wrong. The living room was bright and beautiful. White couches, fresh flowers, the lake sparkling through the windows. Mom sat quietly in her armchair. Grant was on the couch with his laptop open. Beside him, Eleanor stood by the kitchen island holding wine. The second they saw me, everything went silent. No one moved. Grant's eyes darted to his screen. I saw it clearly for 1 second. A chart full of bright red candlesticks dropping, sharply, the kind that shows heavy losses. His hand shot out and slammed the laptop shut. "Hey, honey," he said with a quick smile. "You're home early." Eleanor turned fast. "Anya, darling, we didn't expect you." Mom just looked at me, tired and quiet. I hung up my coat, kissed Mom's cheek, and sat down. "Just felt like coming home," I said, keeping my voice calm. I looked straight at Grant. He shifted the closed laptop away from me. The room smelled of perfume and dinner cooking. Everything looked perfect, the neat magazines, folded blankets, smiling family photos. But the air felt heavy now. I smiled back at them while my mind raced. I had the recording. I had seen those red candlesticks. Something was very wrong. Later, when they thought I was upstairs working, I listened to the recording again. Their cruel words about Mom, the money code, Grant closing that laptop so fast. I knew this beautiful house and happy family. Picture was fake. Cracks were already there, and soon the whole thing would break open. That night at dinner, we sat around the big table with the lake view behind us. Food was served, wine poured, small talk started. Eleanor smiled sweetly and began talking about loyalty and family responsibility. Every word was aimed at Mom, reminding her who was in charge now. I stayed quiet at first, eating slowly, watching them. Mom kept her eyes on her plate. Grant laughed along with his mother. The chandelier light sparkled on the glasses. The water outside was calm and dark. Everything still looked perfect. But inside me, something cold was building. I thought about Mom's sacrifices, working years to buy this place, giving it to us out of love. I thought about the recording in my phone and those red candlesticks on Grant's screen. This wasn't just unkindness, this was bigger. When Eleanor finished another sharp comment about gratitude, I put down my fork and looked straight at her. The table went quiet again. Loyalty isn't something you demand, I said, my voice steady and low. It's something you earn. And sometimes the truth isn't freedom. Sometimes it destroys everything. Grant stopped chewing. Eleanor's smile froze. Mom lifted her eyes to me, surprised. No one spoke for several seconds. Outside, a boat light moved slowly across the dark lake. I picked up my glass and took a sip, acting calm. But I had just drawn the line. They knew something shifted, and I knew the fight had started. After dinner, they cleared plates and made excuses to leave. The table fast. I helped Mom wash dishes in silence. When everyone finally went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, lights low, lake black outside the windows. I opened my phone and played the recording once. More. Every cruel word, every number Grant read. I stared at the family photos on the wall, all of us smiling like nothing could touch us. I wasn't going to let them hurt Mom anymore. I wasn't going to lose this house she worked so hard for. Whatever Grant and Eleanor were hiding, those red candlesticks, the money codes, the secret plans, I would find it, step by step. Because this perfect family picture they showed, the world, it was already cracking, and I was the one who would make it shatter, completely. That evening, we sat down for dinner like we always did. The big dining table faced the lake, the water dark and calm outside the windows. Lights from the chandelier reflected on the glasses. Mom had cooked roast chicken, potatoes, green beans. Simple food she always made when she wanted the house to feel normal. Grant poured wine for himself and Eleanor. He skipped Mom's glass on purpose. I noticed but said nothing yet. We started eating. Small talk about the weather, the neighbor's new boat. Then Eleanor put down her fork and looked straight at Mom. "You know, Vivian," she said with a sweet smile that wasn't sweet at all. "Family is about loyalty and responsibility. Some people give everything and expect nothing back. Others just take and take, then act surprised when people get tired of carrying them." Her words hung in the air. Grant nodded slowly, chewing. Mom kept her eyes on her plate, cutting her chicken into smaller pieces. I watched Eleanor's face. She was enjoying this. She went on. "It's important to remember who pays the bills. Now, who keeps this roof over everyone's head? Gratitude goes a long way. Responsibility, too. Some of us learned that early. Others, well, they still need reminders." Every word was aimed at Mom, calling her ungrateful, calling her a burden. In the house Mom bought with her own money. I stayed quiet at first, eating slowly. But inside, my father's voice came back clear as day. George had left when I was young, but before he went, he used to sit with me at night and talk, straight. One thing he said over and over stuck with me. "Anya, never let anyone trap you with fake loyalty. People who demand respect without earning it are building a net to catch you. Truth cuts through every net, even if it hurts." I heard his words now, loud in my head. Eleanor kept talking, softer now, still stabbing with every sentence. Grant smiled like it was normal conversation. Finally, I put my knife and fork down. The clink sounded sharp in the quiet room. Everyone looked at me. I met Eleanor's eyes. My voice came out low and steady. "Loyalty is not something you demand," I said. "It's something you earn. And sometimes the truth is not liberation, but destruction." The table went completely still. Eleanor's mouth opened a little, then closed. Grant stopped with his glass halfway to his lips. Mom lifted her head and looked at me, eyes wide. No one spoke for several seconds. Outside, the lake was black, only a few lights from houses across the water. Inside, the chandelier kept shining like nothing had changed. Eleanor recovered first. She gave a small laugh. "Well, someone's dramatic tonight." Grant cleared his throat. "Anya, let's not ruin dinner." But I didn't smile back. I picked up my glass, took a sip, and kept looking at them. The message was sent. They heard it. After that, the meal finished fast. Plates cleared, excuses made. Eleanor said she had a headache and went to her room. Grant checked his phone and disappeared into his study. Mom and I washed dishes together in silence. When we finished, she touched my arm lightly. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded. "It's not over." She gave a small, tired smile and went upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen a few minutes, listening to the house settle. Then I walked to the living room, turned off the main lights, and sat in the dark by the window. The recording from earlier was still on my phone. The red candlesticks on Grant's laptop screen flashed in my memory. Eleanor's words at dinner echoed too. I knew what was happening. They were trying to push Mom out, take full control of the house, maybe worse. The money talk I recorded proved it wasn't just words, it was planned. My father's advice rang again. Truth cuts through every net. I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. I wasn't going to let them win. Later that night, when the house was asleep, I went to Grant's study. The door was closed but not locked. I slipped inside. The room smelled of his cologne. His desk was tidy, computer off. Family photos lined the shelves, us smiling at holidays, weddings, vacations. I moved quietly, checking drawers, papers, books. Then I saw it, a small black USB drive hidden behind one of the photos, our wedding picture. I took the drive and left the room without a sound. Back in my office, I closed the door and plugged it into my laptop. The screen lit up asking for a biometric, passcode, fingerprint, or iris scan. I stared at it. Someone was hiding serious secrets, and now I had the key in my hand. The conflict had started at dinner with my words, but it was about to spread fast. Like fire through dry grass, I could feel it. Nothing would stop it now. After my cold words at dinner left the table, frozen and the conflict already beginning to spread like ripples across the dark lake outside, Eleanor stormed upstairs complaining loudly about her headache while Grant grabbed his laptop and retreated to his study with a muttered excuse about work, leaving Mom and me to finish clearing the dishes in a kitchen that suddenly felt too large and too quiet under the steady fall of rain against the windows. We worked together in silence at first until Mom set down a plate, touched my arm gently, and whispered with worry in her voice, "Anya, I've never seen you speak to them like that before, but please be careful. They've been having private conversations about money and the house whenever you leave for work, and I'm afraid of what they might do next." I stopped wiping the counter, looked her straight in the eyes, and answered firmly, "Mom, they can talk all they want, but this is your house. You paid for every part of it with your own hard work, and I'm not going to let them treat you like a stranger or take what belongs to you. I already have proof, and I'm going to use it." She pressed her lips together, nodded once, and whispered back, "Just promise me you'll stay safe," before heading upstairs to her room, leaving me alone with the sound of rain and the decision I had already made to act that very night. When the house finally fell completely silent, hours later with no lights showing under any doors and the rain still tapping steadily on the roof, I slipped out of bed dressed in dark clothes, moved downstairs without shoes to keep every step silent, paused in the hallway to listen for any movement, and then turned the handle of Grant's study door, slowly until it opened without a sound. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me with the softest click, and used only the dimmest flashlight on my phone to search the desk drawers first, finding nothing but ordinary papers until I moved to the shelves lined with family photos and lifted the framed picture from our wedding day. That felt noticeably heavier than the rest. Turning it over quickly, I peeled back the loose backing paper and discovered a small black USB drive taped securely. Inside, which I removed carefully, resealed the frame exactly as it had been to leave no sign of disturbance, and left the study just as quietly as I had entered. I returned upstairs to my home office, locked the door, drew the curtains against the rainy night, sat at my desk under the single lamp, and inserted the USB into my laptop, watching the screen light up and immediately display a security prompt that demanded a biometric passcode, either a fingerprint scan or iris recognition. Looking at the unblinking window while the rain continued outside, I said aloud in a low, steady voice, "You thought hiding it behind our wedding photo and locking it with your own fingerprint would Keep it safe forever, Grant, but I have it now, and I'm going to open it no matter what it takes. The biometric requirement held firm, proving that someone, almost certainly Grant himself, was protecting secrets tied directly to their own physical identity, and breaking through this barrier would only accelerate the conflict I had started at dinner, letting it spread uncontrollably through every hidden corner of our lives. The next morning at breakfast, the tension was thicker than the day before, with Eleanor sipping her coffee in tight-lipped silence and Grant scrolling his phone without looking up until I sat down across from him and asked casually, "Sleep well after all that urgent work last night?" He glanced at me briefly and answered with a forced smile, "Fine, thanks. Just the usual deadlines," while Eleanor added sharply, "Some of us have real responsibilities around here, Anya." I poured coffee slowly and replied without raising my voice, "Responsibilities like hiding things in family. Photos, maybe?" Grant's fingers paused on his screen for a split second before he laughed it off, saying, "What are you talking about?" But Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she set her cup down harder than necessary and warned, "Don't start making wild accusations you can't prove." I met her stare evenly and said, "I don't need to accuse. I just need to keep looking, and I'm very good at finding what people don't want found." Grant stood up abruptly, claiming he had an early meeting, and left the kitchen without another word while Eleanor followed soon after, muttering about ingratitude, leaving Mom and me alone again. Mom looked at me across the table and whispered, "Did you find something last night?" I nodded once and answered quietly, "Yes, and it's locked tighter than I expected, but that only tells me how important it is." She reached over and squeezed my hand briefly before saying, "Then be smart about it. Don't let them see you coming." I promised her I would be careful, finished my coffee, and went to my office to stare again at the biometric prompt that still waited on my screen, knowing that cracking it would change everything. All day at work, I kept thinking about that drive, and when I returned home that evening, Grant was already in the living room with his laptop open until he noticed me and closed it. Quickly, just like before, I stopped in the doorway and asked directly, "Why do you always close your laptop the second I walk in, Grant?" He shrugged and replied too casually, "Client confidentiality, nothing personal." I stepped closer and said, "Everything in this house is personal now, and I'm done pretending otherwise." He stood up, kissed my cheek with a stiff smile, and said he had calls to make upstairs, leaving me standing there certain that the USB I held hidden in my office contained the proof I needed. Back behind my locked door that night, I plugged in the drive again and watched the same biometric window appear, demanding a fingerprint or iris scan that only one person could provide. I leaned toward the screen and spoke coldly to the empty room. "Your own body is the key, Grant, but bodies can be tricked, and I'm going to find a way in, because whatever you're protecting with your fingerprint is going to bring this whole charade down." The lock stayed firm, but its very existence confirmed that someone was hiding something deeply tied to biometrics, and unlocking it would unleash everything I had set in motion. After plugging in the USB and seeing the biometric lock demand a fingerprint or iris scan that only Grant could provide, I sat back in my office chair staring at the screen while the rain hammered the windows, knowing that someone was hiding something so sensitive it required their own body as the key, and I wasn't going to let that stop me. I spent the next day at work pretending everything was normal, attending meetings and reviewing client portfolios, but every free moment I used my secure laptop to research bypass methods for biometric encryption, drawing on tricks I'd learned handling high-security financial data for corporate clients. That evening when I got home, Grant was in the kitchen pouring wine for Eleanor, and he asked casually, "Good day at the office?" While I answered with a neutral smile, "Busy as always. Lots of locked files to open," watching his eyes flicker for just a second before he changed the subject to dinner plans. Eleanor added sharply, "Some things are meant to stay locked, Anya." But I only nodded and went upstairs, locking my office door behind me and sitting down to try the first method I'd prepared, I connected a specialized adapter I kept for forensic work, ran a script that exploited a known vulnerability in the drive's firmware, and watched as the biometric prompt blinked once, twice, then vanished, granting me full access to the hidden partitions. The folders opened one by one, spreadsheets, encrypted wallet keys, scanned contracts, and transaction logs that made my breath catch, because they detailed a full money laundering operation running through fake construction, projects in the neighborhood, and anonymous cryptocurrency transfers. I scrolled through entries showing millions moved, in layers, cash from unknown sources deposited, into shell companies registered to local building, firms, then converted to crypto, washed through multiple wallets, and finally routed back as consulting fees to accounts controlled by Grant and Eleanor. One file listed our exact address as the operational hub, with notes about using the house's private dock for discreet meetings and the garage for storing. Physical ledgers, proving they had turned Mom's gift into the center of their criminal network. Another spreadsheet tracked HOA dues collected from every neighbor, siphoned off in small amounts to fund server, rentals for anonymous transactions, meaning they were stealing from the entire community to cover their tracks. I cross-referenced dates with Grant's travel calendar on his shared cloud drive and saw perfect matches. Every time he claimed a business trip, large sums moved through the crypto chain the same week. A folder labeled Property Transfer Prep contained draft documents that would quietly shift full ownership of the house from Mom's name to a trust controlled by Eleanor, using forged signatures they clearly planned to add later. I sat back, copying everything to an encrypted external drive while the reality sank in. This wasn't just cruelty toward Mom or greed, it was organized crime, and our home was the headquarters. Grant knocked on my office door around 10, calling softly, "Anya, you coming to bed soon?" And I answered calmly, "Through the wood, in a minute. Just finishing a report." Hearing him hesitate before walking away, I kept digging deeper into the files, following wallet addresses and transaction IDs that painted a clear picture of how they layered the dirty money until one subfolder marked "Confidential File" opened to reveal a single PDF. The document was an old internal memo from Pacific Northwest Development Group, the company where my father, George, had worked as finance director 15 years ago, before he left us, listing insider account numbers and routing codes that match several of the earliest transfers in Grant's ledger. My hand froze on the mouse as I read the header, again, confirming the company name and seeing George's signature at the bottom, authorizing the original account setup. The connection hit me hard. The former company where George used to work was directly tied to the start of this laundering chain, meaning whatever Grant and Eleanor were running had roots that reached back to my own father's past. I closed the file, ejected the drive, and hid both copies in my safe, knowing this discovery changed everything, because if George's old company was involved, the conspiracy was older and deeper than I had imagined. Downstairs, the house was dark and quiet, but I stood at the window looking out at the rain-swept lake, realizing the biometric lock I had just broken was only the first barrier. The data proved Grant and Eleanor were using our house as their operational center for serious money laundering. But the link to George's former employer meant someone else might have started it long ago. I whispered into the empty room. "You thought your fingerprint would protect this, Grant, but now I have it all. And this is only the beginning of the war." The conflict that had spread from the dinner table was about to explode, because the name of George's old company sitting in that confidential file told me the fight was far from over. After the confidential file exposed the money laundering trail leading straight back to the company where George had once been finance director, I locked my office the next morning and laid out the two paths I could take with all the evidence now in my hands. I could release everything immediately, the detailed USB records of laundering through local construction projects and cryptocurrency, wallets, the phone recording capturing Grant and Eleanor, humiliating Mom, The draft documents already preparing to strip the house from her name and call the authorities or a federal hotline that same day, which would halt the abuse on the spot, trigger asset freezes before another transfer completed, shield Mom from one more hour of their cruelty, and push Grant and Eleanor into rapid arrests that would restore full ownership to her without delay. Or I could keep silent longer, monitor every new transaction they attempted, while I quietly gathered additional proof, follow the chain deeper into George's old company to uncover who truly started this year's ago, and assemble a case so overwhelming that no lawyer could reduce their sentences or hide their stolen funds, even though the price would be more days of Mom living under their constant attacks, to see exactly how much those extra days would cost her. I pulled up the medical records Mom had forwarded me last year when her doctor urged family involvement. The report scrolled across my screen showing steadily worsening anxiety caused by persistent verbal belittlement and loss of authority in her own residence, with 2 medication increases documented and session notes quoting Mom saying through tears, "I built this home for my daughter, but now I tiptoe around like I don't belong." The dates of her most severe breakdowns aligned perfectly with the largest cryptocurrency movements in Grant's files. Just then, Eleanor's voice rose from the kitchen, sharp and cutting. "Vivian, how many times do I have to tell you, rinse your cup immediately instead of leaving it for someone else to clean?" Mom answered softly, "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I'll do it right now." The apology drifted up the stairs and hit me, harder than any shout could have. Grant knocked on my door minutes later. "Anya, you've been in there all morning. Want me to bring you coffee?" I kept my voice even. "No, thank you, I'm fine." He lingered outside the door before finally walking away. Mom appeared at lunchtime with a small plate, setting it down and knocking gently. "Sweetie, you need to eat something." When I opened the door, she looked drained, eyes red-rimmed. "Mom, are you okay?" She forced a smile. "Just tired. Don't worry about me." I pulled her into a quick hug. "It's going to change soon, I promise." She nodded and left. I sat back down. Medical records open beside the laundering, spreadsheets, and made my choice. I would wait, collect every last connection, including the full truth about George's company, because exposing only part now might let the real architects escape, while full exposure later would bury Grant and Eleanor forever. The house grew quiet after dinner, lights dimming one by one, and I finally reached for my phone to dial George's number I hadn't used in years, needing direct answers about why his former employer's name sat in Grant's confidential folder. The call rang twice before he picked up, and before I could say a word, his voice came through low and urgent. "You've seen the thing, haven't you?" he asked. "Don't do anything until I get there." I gripped the phone tighter, silent on the line, knowing in that instant that the decision to wait had already ignited chaos I could no longer contain alone. George arrived the next afternoon as rain hammered the windows, pushing past the threshold the moment I opened the door and saying in a low, urgent voice, "Upstairs, your office now," while Grant and Eleanor jumped up from the living room couch, Grant demanding loudly, "George, what the hell are you doing here?" And Eleanor adding sharply, "You can't just walk in after all these years." I led George upstairs without answering them, locked the office door behind us, and watched as he swept the room with a small, black scanner before sitting at my desk, opening his briefcase and sliding sealed documents toward me that detailed a hidden seizure clause he had placed in the house trust years earlier, which he activated right then with quick commands on his secure laptop that sent federal triggers to every bank holding Grant's assets. Less than 5 minutes later, Grant's phone exploded with alerts and he roared from downstairs, "Every card declined, every single account frozen. What the fuck is going on?" While Eleanor snatched her own phone and screamed at the bank representative on speaker, "This is fraud. We had millions yesterday. Reverse it immediately or I'll sue the entire company." George snapped his laptop shut and said flatly, "They can't spend a cent now. The money is locked until the investigation ends," just as my phone lit up with a flood of Neighbor texts complaining that power, water, and internet had suddenly cut off to the guest, wing alone. Eleanor had already called the utility company, using her HOA president authority, and ordered an immediate shutoff to Mom's rooms only, claiming delinquent fees in a clear attempt to freeze Mom out and force us to back down. Mom knocked on the office door minutes later, wrapped in 2 blankets, teeth chattering slightly, and asked quietly, "Anya, why is everything dark and cold on my side while the rest of the house is fine?" George stood, placed a hand on her shoulder, and told her, "It's retaliation. It will be fixed soon. Stay with Anya for now." Then turned to me and said, "They're panicking already. That means we hit them hard." And in that moment, I stepped completely into the fight with no turning back. Grant hammered on the office door seconds later, shouting, "Anya, open this door right now. What did you and your father do to our money?" While Eleanor's voice rose to a shriek behind him, "You're destroying our lives. You'll pay for this." I opened the door and faced them both with George at my side, stating coldly, "Your accounts are seized for fraud. Federal order. Fighting it only makes it worse." Eleanor lunged forward, screaming, "You bitch! You planned this all along." Before Grant pulled her back and snarled, "We'll get the best lawyers money can buy," only to have George reply quietly, "Good luck paying them." Eleanor spun away sobbing and locked herself in her room while Grant stormed out the front door to find attorneys who would soon discover their retainers bounced. George left an hour later after confirming the freeze held nationwide and instructed me to search the study for any remaining paper files. That night, while they were still reeling, I waited until well past midnight when the house finally went dark and silent before slipping downstairs toward the study to retrieve whatever physical evidence remained. The hallway was pitch black as I approached the door, my hand reaching slowly for the handle, when a thin, steady red light appeared glowing from the narrow crack beneath the door, pulsing faintly like an active infrared beam. Watching for any movement, I stopped dead, staring at the unnatural glow that meant someone had installed surveillance inside the room we thought was safe. And whatever waited behind that door was far worse than we had ever imagined. After spotting the red light pulsing under the study door like an active infrared sensor, watching for any intruder, I backed away silently and returned upstairs without touching the handle, knowing something far worse than we had anticipated was waiting inside the room we thought was secure. The next morning, George called early and told me to meet his old colleague, a retired FBI agent named Harlan Reed, at a quiet coffee shop downtown because Harlan had worked cases tied to George's past and could provide background we needed before moving further. I drove through steady Seattle rain to the small cafe on a side street, parked, and spotted Harlan already at a corner table, nursing black coffee, his gray hair short and his eyes scanning the door until he saw me and nodded once. I sat across from him and slid a flash drive with selected USB excerpts across the table, asking directly if he could confirm any connections to George's old company and the laundering patterns I had uncovered. Harlan plugged the drive into his tablet, scrolled through files with practice speed, and whistled low before saying, "This setup looks familiar. Shell companies, crypto layering, construction fronts. It matches an investigation we ran 15 years ago that got shut down suddenly." He leaned closer and continued quietly, "Your father was our key consultant then, feeding us insider data from his finance position. But midway through the case, an internal probe started against George himself for allegedly leaking sensitive information to the wrong people." I kept my voice steady and asked, "Was he cleared?" Harlan nodded slowly. "Officially, yes, the leak was traced elsewhere, and the probe closed fast, almost too fast. But some of us always wondered if George had friends high up pulling strings to protect him." He handed the drive back and added, "He's clean on paper, Anya, but that investigation left questions no one answered fully, and if this new operation links back to the old one, George might know more than he's saying." I pressed further, "Do you think he could be involved now?" Harlan shook his head. "Not directly, I worked with him long enough to trust his integrity, but he plays things close, always has. And there are pieces from back then he never shared with anyone. He finished his coffee, stood to leave, and paused at the table edge, looking down at me with a serious expression, before saying, "Vivian is a strong woman, but she is hiding something that George doesn't want you to know." He walked out without another word, leaving me at the table with the check and the warning echoing, because the remaining piece about Mom's past was still concealed, and whatever it was could change everything we thought we understood. I drove home through heavier rain, the wipers beating steadily while Harlan's words repeated, making me realize George's history held shadows that reached into our present fight. Grant was out trying to find cash loans. Eleanor stayed locked in her room, and Mom asked quietly if everything was all right when I walked in soaked. I told her I was fine and went to my office to review the USB files again, searching for any mention of Mom that I might have missed. Nothing direct appeared, but several early transfers routed through. Accounts opened the year Mom sold her business, the same year George left us. The buried secret Harlan hinted at was still out, there tied to both my parents, and finding it would mean digging into places George had warned me to avoid. That evening, George texted that we would meet, again soon to plan the next step. But Harlan's parting words stayed with me, reminding me that Mom's hidden truth remained, concealed and could shift the entire battle when it surfaced. After Harlan Reed left the coffee shop with his warning that Mom was hiding something George didn't want me to know, and the remaining piece about her past stayed concealed, I returned home and locked my office door to dive deeper into the USB data while Grant argued on the phone downstairs about the frozen accounts, and Eleanor paced the hallway muttering threats. I traced the cryptocurrency wallets through multiple exchanges and mixers until one chain led directly to payments for anonymous servers hosted in Eastern Europe, with the originating funds drawn in small batches from the HOA maintenance account that Eleanor controlled as president. The withdrawals matched HOA deposit dates exactly, proving she had siphoned thousands from neighbors' dues over 2 years to fund servers that routed the laundered money without leaving traces. I pulled the HOA financial records from her shared drive and lined them up with the server. Invoices hidden in the USB, capturing screenshots of every match before, saving them to a new encrypted folder. Next, I opened the scanned documents section and found several contracts transferring large sums from Mom's personal accounts to Grant's companies, each bearing Mom's signature in her distinctive looping style. But one was dated during the week Mom was hospitalized and unable to sign anything. The forgeries were clear attempts to make it appear Mom had willingly funded the scheme or to frame her if the operation collapsed. I photographed each page under my desk lamp and added them to the evidence package, then compiled everything into a secure file and sent it to George through his encrypted channel, with a brief note that the HOA funds paid for the servers and the contracts were forged. His reply arrived almost immediately. "Someone is deliberately cleaning up our tracks." I reopened the files and watched in real time as transaction records vanished, server payment logs disappeared, and some forged contract dates shifted to different months, meaning an outside party with access was actively erasing deeper links while leaving only obvious evidence pointing at Grant and Eleanor. Grant knocked on my door that evening and said, "Through the wood, Anya, whatever you're doing, stop, we can still fix this." I replied without opening, "Fixing means admitting everything." Eleanor joined him shouting, "You're tearing this family apart." I ignored them and kept working. Later that night, the house fell silent, and I slipped into Grant's study, avoiding the red sensor light by staying low, entered the safe code I had watched him use, and pulled out a thick envelope from the back. Inside was a complete marriage contract between Mom and Grant, notarized with witnesses and dated last year, carrying Mom's perfect signature that would give Grant legal rights to all her assets upon filing. I held the document under my phone light, staring at the signature I couldn't immediately tell was real or another forgery. Unsure if this was genuine evidence of their plan or a deliberate setup planted for me to find. Someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes, and this contract felt like their next calculated move. After discovering the forged marriage contract between Mom and Grant tucked in the safe with her signature that looked too perfect to be genuine, and someone obviously pulling the strings behind the scenes, I wasted no time sending out emergency HOA meeting notices the next morning, demanding immediate review of financial misconduct while neighbors responded quickly and filled the clubhouse that evening under bright lights overlooking the dark lake. Eleanor sat confidently at the president's table, in her pearls and blazer, gavel in hand, until she saw me enter with George carrying a thick folder and Mom walking quietly behind us, at which point her smile faltered and she gripped the table edge tighter. The room quieted as I took the podium, connected my laptop to the projector, and displayed the first slide showing HOA Bank, statements aligned perfectly with anonymous, server rental invoices paid directly from the maintenance fund. I spoke clearly while clicking through the evidence, explaining that Eleanor had diverted thousands in dues collected from every household over 2 years to overseas accounts used for illegal cryptocurrency routing, and the next slide revealed exact withdrawal, dates and amounts bearing her digital signature as sole authorizer. Gasps echoed through the room as neighbors leaned forward staring at the screen, and Eleanor shot to her feet shouting, "This is a complete fabrication. A jealous resident is trying to ruin my reputation after decades of dedicated service to this community." She banged her gavel hard, demanding the meeting adjourn immediately because no legitimate evidence had been presented through proper channels, and waved dismissively at the projector while calling for a vote to end the session. George stepped forward calmly, placed his folder on the table with a deliberate thud that silenced the murmurs, opened it to reveal printed tax returns with Eleanor's signature claiming the server expenses as charitable deductions, and stated quietly that releasing these documents to the IRS tonight would trigger immediate audits, massive penalties, and possible criminal charges unless she resigned on the spot and agreed to full repayment. Eleanor's face flushed deep red as she slammed both palms on the table, yelling, "You have no right to threaten me. These are forgeries. No one here will believe a word from you or your daughter." Neighbors began shouting questions and demands for explanations, while some called openly for her resignation. And I clicked to the final slide displaying the forged asset transfer contracts with Mom's signature, explaining they were planted to frame an innocent homeowner and that federal authorities already possessed copies. Eleanor lunged toward the projector, screaming, "Turn that off right now! You're lying to everyone here." As several members stood up demanding order and others pulled out phones to record, George raised his voice just enough to cut through the chaos and repeated that the fraudulent tax filings would be emailed to federal authorities within the hour if she did not step down and cooperate fully. Eleanor froze mid-lunge, chest heaving, eyes darting wildly between George, the incriminating screen, and the angry faces surrounding her until her composure shattered completely and she collapsed back into her chair with hands covering her face, while uncontrollable sobs shook her body. The room fell deathly silent except for her, ragged crying until she suddenly lifted her head, mascara streaking down her cheeks, and screamed in raw despair, "I did everything for George. Everything was under his direction." Neighbors gasped and turned toward George in shock while whispers exploded across the room, and I stood motionless at the podium knowing the remaining truth would shatter the whole family when it finally surfaced. After Eleanor's desperate scream that she had done everything for George and under his direction echoed through the clubhouse, leaving neighbors in stunned silence and the remaining truth poised to shatter the whole family, I drove home with George and Mom while the crowd dispersed in shocked whispers and calls to lawyers began. The house felt different that night with Eleanor, locked in her room, sobbing uncontrollably, and Grant pacing the hallway on endless phone calls, trying to salvage what he could from the frozen accounts. George left after a brief discussion in my office, saying federal agents would move soon based on the new information and that I should stay ready. Early the next morning, Grant knocked on my office, door looking pale and exhausted, slipping inside quickly when I opened it and closing the door behind him. He pulled a small silver USB drive from his pocket and pressed it into my hand, saying in a low, urgent voice, "This has everything on Mom, emails, recordings, bank transfers she made without me knowing. She went too far." I took the drive and asked calmly, "Why give this to me now?" Grant glanced toward the door and whispered, "Because she's planning to pin it all on Vivian. Tax fraud charges ready to file today claiming, 'Your mom hid income and moved money illegally. Use this to stop her. I'll testify if needed.'" He added quickly, "She arranged the frame months ago when she thought Vivian might fight back on the house. Forged returns, planted records. Everything points to your mom." I pocketed the drive and said, "You're selling out your own mother." Grant's face twisted. "She sold me out first. I'm done." He left the room fast, grabbing a packed bag from the hallway closet and heading out the front door without another word. I plugged the second USB into my laptop immediately. It contained folders of Eleanor's private emails, instructing accountants to file false returns in Mom's name, recordings of her directing the forgeries, and transfer logs showing she moved money to make it appear Mom controlled the laundering. But the evidence stopped short of the full network. No links to the original source accounts or the overseas wallets, only enough to bury Eleanor while protecting the larger operation. My phone buzzed with sirens approaching in the distance. Black SUVs pulled up outside, FBI agents pouring out with vests and weapons, drawn. They knocked hard on the door, shouting, "Federal warrant, open up." Eleanor's bedroom door flew open and she ran, downstairs screaming as agents entered and read her rights, cuffing her while she kicked and cried that it was all a mistake. At the same moment, Grant's car sped down the driveway and disappeared around the corner, fleeing before agents could reach him. I stood in the hallway watching Eleanor dragged, out still yelling when my phone vibrated with an anonymous text from an unknown number. "Don't trust that USB. The trap is aimed at you, not your mother-in-law." I stared at the screen as agents cleared the house and the driveway filled with vehicles, knowing the next blow would be fatal. After the FBI hauled Eleanor away in cuffs while Grant sped off in his car and the anonymous text warned me not to trust the USB because the trap was aimed at me, not my mother-in-law, I locked the office door, sat at my desk, and plugged in the second drive anyway, determined to see what Grant had really handed over. The folders opened quickly, showing emails and recordings that buried Eleanor deeper, her voice on calls ordering forged tax returns in Mom's name, messages directing accountants to hide income under Mom's accounts, and transfer logs proving she alone set up the frame for tax fraud. I scrolled faster, copying files to my secure backup, when a hidden personal folder labeled Source caught my eye and loaded documents that stopped me cold. Bank statements showed large initial deposits into the laundering chain from accounts traced to George, with memos attached where he provided routing, codes, shell company names, and timing instructions directly to Grant and Eleanor years ago. Emails from George to Grant read, "Use these accounts for the first wash. Keep it clean until phase 2. And another saying, "Send my cut through the usual wallet once it's layered." One scanned contract even had George's signature, agreeing to ongoing data support in exchange for percentages, proving he had financed and directed the entire operation from the start. My hands froze on the keyboard as the truth hit. George had used me completely, feeding me just enough to expose Grant and Eleanor while protecting the larger network, turning my investigation into his cleanup. The files included notes suggesting the forged contracts with Mom's signature as a contingency, scapegoat if things went wrong, meaning George knew about or even approved, framing Mom. Sirens wailed outside, growing louder, red and blue lights flashing through the windows as local police cars screeched into the driveway, and officers jumped out with weapons ready. The front door banged open with shouts of, "Police! Warrant! Hands up!" while Mom ran into the hallway asking, Anya, what's happening? Officers stormed in yelling, Vivian Chen! You're under arrest for aggravated tax fraud, and read the warrant listing fabricated returns and hidden millions they claimed she controlled. Mom backed against the wall, repeating, I didn't do this. I've never hidden money. As two officers grabbed her arms, cuffed her, and led her toward the door while she looked at me, pleading, Anya, help me. I stood frozen in the office doorway, holding the USB that proved George's betrayal, watching Mom taken away in handcuffs for crimes he helped plant, realizing the ultimate betrayal had come from the person I trusted most and that someone had turned the tables completely. After the local police stormed the house and dragged Mom away in handcuffs for aggravated tax fraud, while the proof on Grant's USB showed George as the mastermind who had financed and guided the entire laundering operation, I stood frozen in the hallway as officers cleared out and neighbors watched from their windows, the chaos leaving me facing the total collapse of everything I thought I knew. Mom's voice still echoed in my ears as she pleaded, Anya, I didn't do this, tell them, while an officer pushed her into the patrol car and the front door hung open with red-blue lights flashing across the lake. I slammed the door shut, ran to my office, and locked it again, hands shaking as I grabbed the first USB, the one I had never fully opened because of the biometric lock. The anonymous text burned in my mind. The trap was aimed at me, but I had nothing left to lose. I pressed Mom's thumb, still warm from when she hugged me minutes earlier, against the scanner on my laptop reader. The lock clicked open instantly. Files flooded the screen. I clicked the largest one labeled Truth. My birth certificate loaded first. Father, not listed. Mother, Vivian Chen. Issuing authority, Department of Justice sealed. Record. A second document opened. An official DOJ memo explaining that Special Agent George Chen married Vivian Chen 28 years ago under false pretenses as part of a long-term undercover operation to protect her and the unborn child from a violent financial crime syndicate targeting her family's business. George had never been my real father. He stayed in our lives only to shield us. Another file was Vivian's handwritten letter, dated last year. If you're reading this, Anya, the plan is working. I created the forged contracts myself and gave them to Grant. I let Eleanor think she was framing me so you would find them and fight. My arrest today is on purpose. It forces Grant to run straight to the big boss. Overseas, George needs that location. Forgive us. We love you. A final audio file played. Mom's calm voice, sweetheart. George has been hunting this syndicate for decades. They killed my parents. He divorced me on paper to keep us safe, but he never stopped protecting us. Everything you did led to this moment. Trust the plan. I sat back as the pieces snapped together. George needed Grant arrested to flush out the real leader hiding abroad. Mom willingly took the arrest to make Grant panic and run. They had used me, yes, but only to keep me alive and bring justice. The house was silent now except for rain against the windows, Mom in a cell, George somewhere watching, Grant racing toward the trap. I wiped my face, picked up my phone, and dialed the unknown number that had appeared. In Mom's letter, it rang once. A man answered, voice low. Chen? I spoke, chillingly calm. I'm ready. The big boss will be caught by me. After I hung up the phone with that chillingly calm declaration that I was ready and the big boss would be caught by me, I sat at my desk in the silent house and opened both USB drives side by side, combining every transaction log, wallet address, and communication thread while using my financial analysis tools to trace patterns Grant had left in his panic. I filtered the crypto flows for recent activity and spotted a large transfer scheduled within the next hour from one of Grant's frozen wallets to an overseas exchange that still showed partial liquidity, meaning he was attempting a final desperate move to salvage funds and meet someone in person. Cross-referencing the exchange's IP logs with George's secret DOJ access codes he had quietly shared earlier revealed the receiving wallet belonged to an account registered in Singapore, under a shell company I recognized from the deepest layers of the first USB. I mapped the timing and location data, pinpointing the transaction endpoint to a private banking suite in downtown Vancouver where Grant would have to appear physically to complete the overseas handoff. The big boss was meeting him there, George's long target finally surfacing because Grant's flight had forced the contact. I compiled the coordinates, timestamps, wallet proofs, and exchange records into a single encrypted package and sent it to George's secure channel, with the subject Vancouver Suite 1804 Final. Transaction now. His reply came instantly. Confirmed. Teams moving, stand by. The house remained empty and dark with Mom still, in holding and Eleanor processed downtown. But I knew the counterattack was launching and every piece had fallen into place except one critical gap George had warned about earlier. We needed physical proof from Grant's safe, deposit box at the main Seattle bank, a signed ledger linking the big boss directly that would seal international warrants. Without the key Grant carried, the box stayed sealed. Hours passed with updates from George showing teams closing on Vancouver, but the key remained missing. Then headlights swept the driveway as a patrol car returned with Mom for a brief evidence review. Before transfer, officers escorted her inside in cuffs while she kept her head high and eyes on me as they walked her past the entry table toward the living room for paperwork. Mom stumbled slightly on purpose, her foot kicking something small across the floor that slid directly to my feet. I looked down. A plain brass safe deposit key glinting on the tile. Mom met my gaze for a split second and gave the tiniest nod while an officer pulled her upright, saying, "Careful, ma'am," completely missing the drop. The key lay there at the right time for the wrong person to see, and the police noticed nothing as they finished paperwork and let her back out. I picked it up, closed my fist around it, and knew the final counterattack now had everything it needed. After Mom slipped the safe deposit key to my feet, during her brief escort back into the house for paperwork and the officers noticed nothing while leading her away again, I drove immediately to the downtown bank with George on speaker coordinating FBI teams already, closing in on the Vancouver location I had pinpointed. The vault manager verified the warrant George expedited and opened Grant's box under supervision, revealing a sealed ledger that I photographed, page by page showing the big boss's personal signature on every major transfer alongside offshore account details that completed the international chain. I uploaded the scans directly to George's secure server from the bank lobby and said, "Ledger acquired, full links confirmed," while he replied, "Team's hitting the suite now, stand by for confirmation." Minutes later, his voice came back urgent. "Grant, in custody resisting. Big boss detained without incident. Extradition starting." I drove home as news alerts began flashing across my phone with headlines about a major financial crime syndicate takedown spanning countries. Federal prosecutors filed charges against Grant and Eleanor the same week using the combined evidence from both USBs, the ledger, and George's undercover records, resulting in swift indictments for money laundering, conspiracy, and wire fraud with no bail granted. The larger syndicate crumbled as overseas arrests followed, dismantling the network George had pursued for decades. Mom was released days later when charges against her collapsed completely after the planted tax. Fraud evidence traced back to Eleanor alone. George met us outside the detention center, handed Mom release papers, and drove us home where he presented documents from a secret DOJ trust fund that repurchased the house from temporary government hold and transferred full ownership to me with clear title. Mom hugged me tightly on the front steps and whispered, "It's ours again, truly ours." I looked at George and said, "You built our lives on lies." He nodded once, "To keep you both breathing." I accepted it then. The network of deception had been their shield, protecting me from enemies I never knew existed, and their love remained real beneath every layer. I resigned my financial analyst position the following month and accepted an offer from the Department of Justice as a counter-cybercrime data analyst, stepping into George's world with the skills This ordeal had sharpened. As I walked through the quiet house with sunlight streaming across the lake view that finally felt peaceful, I understood justice had arrived not only as punishment for the guilty, but as restoration of what had been stolen from us all. In the fight against lies, you don't always know who is on your side, but sometimes the cruelest truth is the strongest shield, protecting those you love. Justice is not just punishment, but self-restoration after facing what we dared not believe. The entire drama was exposed, and justice was completely served. My dear friend, did this story touch your heart the way it touched mine? What city are you watching from? Tonight, tell me in the comments. I love hearing from you and feeling that connection. If it moved you, please show your support with a super thanks so I can keep sharing these heartfelt tales. Thank you so much for your wonderful encouragement. It means everything to me. I can't wait to read your thoughts. On screen, you'll see 2 new real-life stories, I think. You'll adore. There are plenty more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. See you in the next one. With all my love and respect,